In today's video, wrist wraps, lifting straps, lifting belts, when to use them and why. Stay tuned. What's going on, everyone? Pro Physique Coach Ben Belluti here. Today we're going to go over wrist wraps, lifting straps, lifting belts. When to use them, should we ever use them? Why should we do it? And I'm addressing this question for my Instagram direct messaging from Matt. Matt says essentially, should I be using lifting straps, wraps, the belt, why, pros and cons, that sort of thing. So let's dive right into it, starting with wrist wraps. So I like to use wrist wraps to provide stabilization during my pressing movement. So heavy sets, working sets on overhead press, bench press, and that sort of thing is when I use the wrist wraps. If you have seen any of my lifting videos, you know that when I'm doing my dumbbell presses especially, I use a really controlled negative repetition, right? That rep cadence is very controlled. It's also very fatiguing on the forearms and my grip. And anything to benefit me, to allow me to be just a little bit stronger, I'm gonna use. So lifting wraps are a must for that reason. Wrist stabilization, what does that mean? Well, you'll find that if you don't think about it, when you're doing your heavy pressing work, your wrist will start to lean back, especially as you're doing your bench press. You wanna keep that flat wrist the whole time. Number one, you're gonna be stronger. It's gonna reduce chance of injury as well, in your wrist. And it's gonna give you that marginal improvement. So during your working sets, use them. When you're warming up, I don't recommend it. Something that I see that people do wrong all the time is that they will put their wrist wraps on at the beginning of a workout. And let's say they have a 90-minute workout, they'll put them on and they will leave them on for the whole workout. If that's the case, you don't have it on tight enough, you put it on during your working set. So do your set, take it off, don't leave it on for hours on end, and you're gonna get the benefit. Lifting straps. So I use these almost prehistoric lifting straps that you put on your wrist, like so, for my heavy hip hinging work. So deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts especially. Basically exercises where I'm using a high load, have also plenty of time under tension. I do not want my grip and my forearms to be the limiting factor. When I'm doing RDLs, I want my back, my glutes, my hamstrings to be the limiting factor, okay? If I'm worried about my grip, number one, I'm going to drop the barbell, right? And thus the set is going to be over. And number two, that also can increase risk of injury, because if I'm just thinking about that, not really thinking about my technique as much, I start rounding the back, right? And then we start getting to that range of the scared cat deadlift, right? So that's why I like to use my wrist wraps, and I do not care, My grip isn't great. When I'm warming up for RDLs, I'll give you an example. Earlier today, my top set was with 275, and I used my wrist wraps. When I was warming up, my last, my fourth warm-up set was with 185 for 4 reps, and I could feel that my grip was giving a little, okay? So my next warm-up with 225, I slapped on the wrist wraps the rest of the way up to my working sets and through my 3 working sets, and that did the job well. You could also get Versa grips, which I do have. I'm going to grab them here in a second. Personally, I just do not like them. Let me grab them to show you what they are all about. So here are the Versa grips that I have. These are better because unlike the lifting straps, you don't have to sit there and wrap them around the barbell. These, you can simply just kind of, once you got it set up, you just simply bend down. So you're doing a deadlift, bend down, you grab that bar, and you got an enhanced grip, right? I just found these to be as awkward as heck. I mean, they just do not feel right, and personally, I hate them. That may not be a popular opinion, but that's the truth. So I will stick with my very old wrist wraps. They get the job done. They've done it for years. Now, I used to compete in powerlifting, and when you are on the competitive stage, platform, you can't use wrist wraps, okay, or straps. So you are forced to use your grip, right? You got to figure out how to pick up that deadlift without dropping it. So yes, when I did that, I trained both with hook grip and with an over-under grip to just enhance my grip on the deadlift. But since I'm doing bodybuilding now, I do not want my grip being the limiting factor. I don't care. I want the muscle being the limiting factor. All right, let's talk about that lifting belt, okay? This is a Rogue belt. I can pull up the specific model later. Thicker belt. Now, when do I use a belt? Do I use a belt? I do sometimes. I try to use it as least as possible, but again, I want my form to be proper. I don't want to get hurt when I'm lifting. When you're doing your compound lifts, squats, deadlifts, exercises where you bend over rows, that sort of thing, Romanian deadlifts, I recommend this. Now, up to recently, I was exclusively doing my heavy RDLs without the belt because when I got around my last show and even months after, my belt essentially became useless. It was like digging into my skin. I'll feel like my rib cage would kind of get stuck on the belt just because I didn't have a lot of body fat at that time, right? Well, now 7 months post-show, that's not so much of a problem. So I put it on from time to time, but I do like to challenge my core and try to perform some exercises beltless just because I'm very confident with the form. However, I do recommend for working sets only to use the belt, okay? Now, we're not using it as a back brace. We're using it to create intra-abdominal pressure in your core. So, when you strap that belt on, you want it to be just a little bit looser than you think it needs to be. So that way, I can take a big belly breath into my stomach and push against the belt. Let's say I'm doing some, all right, let's use the example of RDLs, right? If I'm doing a heavy set of RDLs, I'm able to get a big breath, push it into the belt. That is what creates that intra-abdominal pressure and keep me very braced, okay, and reduce the chance of injury, all right? You don't want it to be so tight that you can't breathe because that's defeating the purpose, right? So put that on during your working sets. You don't need to use the belt for dumbbell curls, side lateral raises. I know people do that, it looks cool. There's no need for that. And also people, this is going to another topic, but people ask me about ab training. Look, I do very minimal ab training, and I'll show you some pictures on stage. I have very defined abdominals, and it's, your abs don't just turn off when you put on a belt, okay? So feel free to use your belt. And also, building core strength is done with your compound lifts, okay? If I'm doing heavy set of RDLs with or without a belt, that's very challenging on the core. But I digress, that's another topic for another day. Hope this was helpful for some of you guys. So pick up your wrist wraps, lifting straps, the belt. It's well worth the investment. Take care.